Hi, I'm Phast Freddie. I'm from Los Angeles originally, and I knew the Zeros quite well. In fact, I was their first manager. I actually managed the Zeros for probably about a month or two. I wasn't a very good manager. Otherwise, you'd all have heard of them a lot sooner. But managed them, I tried. I first heard of the Zeros when my old girlfriend Audrey presented me with a tape that she had gotten from someone who used to correspond with her through the mail, who's from San Diego. Her name was Jackie. And so Jackie knew the Zeros in the San Diego area. They're from Chula Vista, California, actually a little bit south of San Diego. Jackie got the tape to Audrey. Audrey got the tape to me. I got the tape to the Nerves, who were putting on shows that they called the Punk Palace. They put on a series of these shows. The first one was at SIR, and it was the first time the Weirdos ever played. See if I can remember the bands that played. The Nerves played, the Weirdos, the Zippers, the Dills, and another band whose name totally escapes me, but they weren't very good and nothing ever happened to them afterwards anyway. The second time they did the Punk Palace was at a place called the Orpheum. This was the little theater across the street from Tower Records on Sunset Boulevard. The second time, the Weirdos played again, and the Nerves. Maybe another band, I can't remember. Then the time after that, I believe, is when the Zeros played. And this was also the first time that the Germs played. And the gig was the Germs, the Weirdos, and the Zeros, and I don't believe the Nerves were involved with this one. I think the Weirdos actually put it on, but they got all the information from the Nerves in order to put this show on. And at this gig, the Germs were supposed to go on first. None of them seemed to know how to even set up their equipment, let alone play their instruments. I don't think they ever properly plugged in. Mostly they just kind of beat on things a little bit, make jokes with their friends. And Bobby Pinn, as Darby Crash was known at the time, had a bottle of peanut butter and smeared peanut butter all over his friends, as he had seen Iggy Pop do on some TV show. He thought that was punk. The Weirdos roadies, meanwhile, friends of the Weirdos, thought it was stupid and cleaned off the Weirdos, the Germs equipment from the stage in order for the Zeros to play. The Zeros, in complete contrast to the Germs, absolutely knew how to play their instruments. They had great songs, and they were just really good that night. And everybody was impressed. They were really young, these four Mexican kids coming up from Chula Vista, California. It's a long ride. It's, 3-hour drive coming up to do this show. They were really good. Everybody was really impressed with them. And afterwards, I introduced myself. I said, "Hey, I'm Phast Freddie. You guys are great." And we got the word around. We brought Greg Shaw. Greg Shaw might have been at one of those shows. He may not have. But we definitely got the word to Greg Shaw, who eventually made records with them. Also at that gig, I believe, were the Damned. Members of the Damned were in town that week for their big show at the Starwood. So they were at the gig. The Weirdos played, and it was the Weirdos' first gig with a drummer. They had done 2 gigs before that without a drummer. The Weirdos were one of the greatest bands that ever walked this planet, just flat out. They were a great band. But the Zeros were also a really great band. They had really great songs, and they seemed to me that they had been operating before they had even heard of a lot of these other punk things going on. They might have read about them, but I don't think they knew what any of them sounded like, because those records, I don't think those records made it to Chula Vista right away. Certainly not as soon as they made it to Hollywood. But the Zeros definitely knew what they were going. They knew what they were doing. They were definitely fans of the New York Dolls. They were fans of the Stooges and the Velvet Underground. And I think it helped that Javier's older brother was in the Nuns, Alejandro, and he was a great guitarist. I wasn't a big fan of the Nuns. I saw them a couple of times. They were pretty good. They had some pretty good songs. And the girl was a pretty good singer. She was kind of a fake Nico. They really tried to be this kind of artsy Velvet Underground type of band. With these two gentlemen lead singers. The woman played keyboards and sang a little bit. And they were kind of cool, but the best thing about them was Alejandro. He was a great guitarist. But I thought the Zeros were much better. The Zeros were one of the best bands on the scene, without a doubt. But, this is how I first met the Zeros. Then I did my thing. I had a magazine called Backdoor Man at the time, and I was busy doing my thing with the magazine, busy getting drunk, busy being a scenester. The Zeros, meanwhile, busy getting their thing together, writing more songs, getting more gigs. They did some gigs at the Mask. I remember seeing them at the Mask a couple of times. The Mask was the big punk rock show. After the Punk Palace stopped doing shows, I think they only did 2 shows at the Orpheum. Soon after that, this was like the spring, I think, of late winter or early spring of 1977. Soon after that, probably by the summer of 77, was when Brendan Mullen got the Mask together. It was basically this basement under the Pussycat Theater that was showing, it seemed to only show Deep Throat, that horrible X-rated movie Deep Throat. I think that was the only movie that it ever showed. But in the basement of the theater was the Mask. You go around the back in the alley, you go down these stairs, and it was this horrible place that smelled of all kinds of things. It was originally a rehearsal place, but somebody cleared out a bunch of space and they started having shows there because there was nowhere else for these bands to have shows. So the Zeros played there several times. The Germs played there after they got it together and actually learned how to play. They played there. The X played there. The Screamers played there. The Weirdos played there. The Dills played there. A lot of great bands played there. And by, I guess, around 1978, I managed the Zeros for a little while. I was involved with a lot of other things, so unfortunately I really didn't spend that much time managing them as I should have. And I feel bad about that now. It's like the guilt trip coming back, because they really were a really good band and they deserved a much better manager than I was ever able to do at the time. But I did get them a couple of gigs. I helped them get a gig opening for the Screamers at the Whiskey A Go Go, one weekend, and that was really a great gig. I helped them do this gig at where was it? This place on I can't remember, but there's some big hall that wasn't really a rock and roll place. This other group, what was the group I think was called Dred Scott, they had set up the gig. And they asked if the Zeros would play. I go, yeah, but the Zeros want so much money. I think we wanted $100 to do this gig. And the guy goes, okay, we'll give you $100. And so we did the gig, and they might have made the money, because I understand there was a lot of people there. But apparently there was some kind of ride or something. I worked at I was a night manager at a burger stand, actually. I come back to the gig to see how it's going, hoping I can catch some of the gig. And I see Javier and some of the Zeros hanging out in the street. Everybody's in the street going, hey man, what are we going to do? So I go over to Javier, I go, what happened? He goes, they stopped the gig. I go, what do you mean they stopped the gig? They stopped the gig, we did our show, and then everybody was pogoing, and the people stopped the gig. I go, did you get your money? He goes, no, they didn't pay us yet. So I go over, I find the guy who set up the gig. I go, hey man, we did our thing. Where's our money? He goes, well, I can't give you all the money because, they stopped the gig. We could have gotten more money. I go, we did our thing, and, that's not my fault. And so they ended up giving us $75. And the guy, Greg Burke, who had set up the gig, for years I held this against him. It got to a point where it was more of a joke than anything. And finally, he and I got to be really good friends, where he actually played saxophone for a little bit in my band, in the mid-'80s. But he was actually a really nice guy. And his band was actually a pretty good band, the Dred Scotts. So another thing I did for the Zeros is we did a photo shoot in Tijuana. we drove into Tijuana in, might have been Javier's beat up station wagon. And I don't remember if it was Audrey, my old girlfriend, or Rhoda, who was the photographer, but we just went through Tijuana, all the little tourist spots, and took photos of the Zeros. You know, buying shoes. Back then you could buy the old-fashioned pointed-toed boots and shoes in Tijuana, really easy, really cheap, but we'd go there all the time to buy them. And they would be there buying shoes, we'd get pictures. And at the time, my friend Lenny Kay, who's the guitarist for Patti Smith Group, he was involved with Rock Scene magazine. And so I was able to get some of these photos into Rock Scene magazine. They got several of the photos in there. Pictures of the Zeros posing with the painted donkey, the donkey painted up to look like a zebra, you know, which was a big tourist attraction. It's one of the things they do there in Tijuana. We got pictures of them buying tequila, you know, just eating at a Mexican restaurant there in Mexico, you know. So we just got these photos out. And the worst thing, one of the worst things I ever did for the Zeros is I gave them the tag, the Mexican Ramones. This was for some reason my idea. This is the Mexican Ramones. But actually, they weren't really all that Mexican. Hector was born in Mexico. The others were all born in America. Javier was born in Austin, I'm pretty sure. And the others were born in San Diego, I believe. But Hector was born in Mexico. He actually had a green card, you know, that he had to show every time we crossed the border. You know, they weren't really like the Ramones either. They were more like the Heartbreakers. They should have been the Mexican Heartbreakers, you know. So I feel really bad about that. But it did give them a little bit of notice, the Mexican Ramones. It gave something that people could hang their hat on. Oh, this is the Mexican Ramones. And that became something that they could say, that's what the Zeros are. But you know, the Zeros were a really great band that really deserved a better fate. They never made a proper album. They never really did a proper tour. And they really deserved to be, you know, one of the great punk rock bands of all time, because they really were. And to me, they were, because I got to know them so well as their sort of manager and you know, hanging out with them and stuff. And I was older than them. I must have been 23 or 4, I think, at the time, maybe 25. And they were all 18, I think. Javier was the oldest, with probably 18. I think Robert might have been 16. Hector probably was 16 or 17, and Baba also was really quite young. And after Hector left the band, Guy, Robert's brother, joined the band. And he was 15, you know, he was really young. And at one point, I was living in Hollywood on Sunset Boulevard. I had a little apartment there. And Guy, Robert's brother, might have been before he joined the band, but he had got in an argument with his parents and he ran away from home. And he came up and he stayed with me. He had nowhere else to go. He had stayed with, we had some friends who had this place called the Pludger Pit, these punk rock girls on Santa Monica Boulevard, down the street a little bit from the Starwood. And it was nonstop, hectic, people taking drugs, having sex, getting drunk, and it was madness. And one day I was there drinking with everybody else, and Guy was there because I'd run away from home. I go, where are you staying? He goes, I'm staying here. I go, you can stay with me. So he stayed on my couch for maybe a few days, and then his father came up one day, and they had a heart-to-heart talk, and he went home with his father. They smoothed it out, you know. Then soon after that, Guy joined the band, and you know, I think he might have been 18 by that time. But yeah, Zeros. Yeah, I think they were definitely an inspiration for a lot of the bands, especially from Orange County, which is only, you know, half an hour to an hour away, that they can come up to. Here's the Zeros. The Zeros also got lumped in with, after the Zeros had been on the scene for some time, there are some punk bands like the Brat and a few others, I can't remember their names, but the Brat were probably one of the best out of them. There was a band called Felix and the Cats. I think they were an East LA band too. But these bands were all from East LA, and because the Zeros were Mexican, of, you know, Hispanic descent, they got kind of lumped into that too by people who didn't know better. You know, people who were on the scene for a long time knew better, but newer people go, oh, they must be East LA too. No, they're from Chula Vista, you know. They used to do Pipeline, and I remember, and they did it because they had learned it off a tape of the Heartbreakers, because the Heartbreakers used to do Pipeline. And Javier didn't know what the song was actually called. I remember looking at one of his set lists once. It said Wipeout. I go, Wipeout? You guys do Wipeout now? He goes, yeah, you know, that song that the Heartbreakers did. I go, really? Heartbreakers? I don't remember them doing Wipeout. He goes, yeah, you know. And so he did, you know, he did the set. And of course, he does Pipeline. I came up to him after the gig. I go, that's not Wipeout, that's Pipeline. He goes, really? I go, yeah, it's Pipeline. He goes, oh. He didn't know at the time. But you know, the songs you knew, you know, the songs that you know from the album that came out eventually, they did all those songs. And those songs are great. I remember, you know, Beat Your Heart Out was one of my favorites. It's one of Robert's songs. Wild Weekend is one of my all-time favorite songs. What a great song. That was one of the later songs. You're Just a Wimp is one of the early songs. You know, they're really into their look, about this cool 60s look, though they didn't really sound 60s. They had a very modern 70s punk rock sound. But I remember this time when they came over to my house before a gig. They were all dressed up, ready to go. And they were making fun of Hector because Hector was wearing a turtleneck sweater, or a turtleneck anyway. He was wearing a turtleneck over his jacket. And so they're coming over to my house, and I'm wearing a turtleneck. And Hector turns to them and goes, Phast Freddie's wearing a turtleneck. See, a turtleneck's cool. And they go, oh, yeah, okay, it's cool. You know, they didn't give him any crap after that.
Were you involved in any way with the Bomb Singles?
The Bomb Singles? No. I may have been involved with helping Greg Shaw become aware of the Zeros. I don't remember. It's very possible that Shaw saw the first gig that I saw as well, and immediately snapped them up, said, I want you guys. But I remember after that, their deal was only for 2 singles, and when I was managing them, I was going to do I negotiated with Greg Shaw a little bit about doing an album deal with him. And for some reason that didn't happen. I can't remember exactly why. I mean, we should have just done it, because no one else was beating down the door to do a deal, but, you know. No, they you know, somebody might have asked them that before these power pop bands happened, really. But they really were not a pop band. I mean, some of them, like Beat Your Heart Out, might have been or Hand Grenade Hard. Some of their songs were kind of poppy, but they had a good sense of, you know, to write their songs. They know that there's got to be a little bit of melody. You can't just be thrashing it out. And they wrote good, intelligent songs, and it might have been because of that somebody might have confused them for power pop. But no, I wouldn't say they were a power pop band. So I keep in touch with Javier. When was it? I can't remember. It must have been about 10 years ago. So it's, 97 or something. I was back in Los Angeles. And we had this big party. My friend Brendan Mullen from The Mask, big party. And basically we just gathered as many of our old friends from the old days as possible into his backyard and had this barbecue. And Javier comes. I make sure Javier comes. I go, come, bring Rhoda. It's going to be great. Little did I know, not only did he bring Rhoda, he brought Robert, he brought Hector, and he brought Baba. All of the Zeros are there. It was so nice. It was so good after all these years. And this is 20 years after the Zeros we first met. All the Zeros were there. It was so good to see them. It's like, oh my God. And Baba, I thought I'd never see again in my life. You know, he's just one of these guys who just, like a happy-go-lucky guy who'll do anything, you know. But it was just so good to see them all. We took pictures and everything. It was really great. So that was really great. And you know, I'm still in touch with Javier. Every once in a while, he'll email me. I've got new songs. Do you want to hear them? I always want to hear Javier's songs. He's such a great songwriter. Hector was in the the Flying Colors for a while. But he moved up to San Francisco. Was in several bands. He was in I can't remember. He was in a couple of bands, but the Flying Color, I don't remember if I saw them or not, but they were a pretty cool band. But I'm not much in touch with Hector as much anymore. I think he's one of my friends on MySpace. I should email him. Such a nice guy and really talented fellow. And Robert Alves, I'm still in touch with. Robert, whenever he comes to New York, he'll call me and says, "Hey, I'm coming. You got to come out." And whenever he introduces me to anybody, he goes, "This is my first manager. This is Phast Freddie. He was my first manager." He's so great. But Alves, Robert, when I knew him, in this 20, 30 years ago in the Zeros, he was the young, quiet, really good-looking kid. He would never say anything. You ask him something, he would answer you using few words as possible. He was very shy. And now he's Alves. He's like this amazing show that he had thought up, and he does it every night on stage. It's just amazing. Really talented guy. It's really great. I'm really proud of his success. In another story I want to tell is my girlfriend and I are in New Orleans. No, I'm sorry, not New Orleans. We're in Las Vegas for this big rock show called the Rock Around. They used to do. I don't think they do it anymore. All our friends are there. We have a bunch of friends into this kind of like wild rockabilly and garage rock. So we go out there and see all these bands. We have a great time. The last night of the show, my girlfriend goes, "It's my last night. I want to stay up. I'm seeing all the bands." The last band to play was this band called the Dragons. Now, I had read about the Dragons because for a while I was doing the obituaries for Discovery's magazine, this record collector's magazine in America. It doesn't exist anymore. But one of the obituaries I wrote was the obituary for Javier's father. And Javier's, not only was Alejandro his brother, but there was a Coke Escovedo, who was this big Latin music percussionist, was his brother. There's another Escovedo who was really big in Latin rock music. What was his name? He played in Santana. I can't remember. So Sheila E., who's Sheila Escovedo, not a nephew, but a niece. She's a niece of Javier. So they have this big family. I had to do an obituary on Javier's father, who's somebody I actually met, because I used to stay with Javier on the floor of his parents' house. When I'd go down to Chula Vista, if I was going to stay overnight, if they were doing a gig down there, I'd stay overnight. And so it was kind of sad. And so when doing my research on the father, I learned about the Dragons. The Dragons is Javier's little brother was in the Dragons. But I had forgotten that when we saw them. I'm looking at this guy, this good-looking guy. I'm thinking, this guy looks really familiar. And he's singing. This guy, his voice is really familiar. And he's singing these really great songs. The band is really good. They're really rocking. So I come to a friend of mine who's also watching the show, and he's rocking out. He's obviously familiar with the band. I ask him, "Hey, who's this lead singer? Is he related to Javier Escovedo?" He goes, "Yes, it's his little brother." I go, "Oh, no wonder." So after the show, we stayed and watched the whole show. After the show, I introduced myself. I go, "Hi, I'm a friend of your brother Javier. My name's Phast Freddie." He goes, "Phast Freddie, that's a name I've known all my life." So recently, the Zeros have been doing these reunion shows in Spain. I'm really happy that they've got this audience in Spain. A couple of years ago, I actually DJ'd some gigs in Barcelona and in Valencia. We did this New Year's Eve gig in Valencia. And I wasn't sure how many records to bring, and I ended up running out of records. And the other DJ next to me goes, "Just use the records that we have here." I go, "Fine." So I'm going through the records, and I see, well, they have some Zeros records. I put on a Zeros record, and the whole place just started going, "Yeah, yeah," and singing along. I'm going, "I love this. The Zeros belong here." And I was so happy to see that the Zeros were so popular in Spain. It was so good. I'd love to see the Zeros again. I really would. They're such a great band.